My name's Noni Strand. I am simply showing up here to get things going. Thanks to Kaylee Inez, who is our tech guru, and to Pastor Dean Abel, who is the one who is the pastor of this and helped film this. We are going to hear from our farmers first through a video that they put together, and then they'll have time for questions and answers on site. This is a very, very busy time for farmers. So they were not able to be here in person, but so grateful that they were willing to do this for us. I think sometimes we don't hear as much from farmers. So it's great to have their voices represented. So thank you very, very much.
Good afternoon. We're here at Assyria Lutheran Church in central Kansas. Today we are going to talk a little bit about creation care and agriculture. Our local farmers here and members of the church, Stephen Johnson, Connie Dorff, and Ron Heimer. They are standing actually in part of our cemetery that's not being used right now, so it's planted in wheat. And then beyond there, a farmer has some corn planted. And if you look over to the, well, over Ron's shoulder, you'll see an irrigation pivot. Today is Memorial Day, as I said, and you can see behind me that we have flags up for our veterans. We read 111 names this morning of veterans that are buried here or had some association with our congregation. And there's Assyria Lutheran Church. We're going to go in and talk a little bit more, but we wanted to show you how things look like out here too. That's right. Well, welcome to the sanctuary of Assyria Lutheran Church. This was, like many of the congregations around here, founded by Swedish Lutheran immigrants in 1875. It's kind of a satellite of Salemsburg Lutheran Church, which is 5 or 6 miles to the west here. And there were a couple guys, a couple bachelors that came back even earlier. Now I can't remember the date, maybe 1869 or something like that. Bengt Hessler and Måns Peterson came here. Stephen Johnson, who's here with us today, is a direct descendant of those people, as are many people in our congregation now. We worship about 70 to 80 probably on average on a Sunday. Have an active Sunday school and a lot of children, and so it's a good church. This building, which you see around us, was built in about 1915, and it's served the congregation well for that. I'm going to show you the stained glass here in the front, and then we'll pan down to our panel, and they can introduce them. So we have the resurrection here. Oh, it's real hard to see with the afternoon light, but there it is. The empty tomb, Jesus risen from the dead. So why don't we start with Stephen? He can tell us a little bit about himself, and then we'll go on to the others.
So Stephen Johnson, a 5th generation here at Assyria. Get to be born, grow up, and continue on the farm. My brother took over the livestock operation, and I work in crops, and I also happen to serve in the Kansas legislature.
I'm Connie Dorff, and I'm a 4th generation farmer on the Smoky Hill River, just a couple miles south of here. And I have a cow-calf operation and a diversified crop operation.
Ron Heimer, 4th generation, come from south of Assyria here, about 4 or 5 miles, close to the little town of Bridgeport, where I grew up. Grow crops and had about a 20-year stint some time ago in the dairy business.
And I would like to say all of us serve in many aspects, whether it be in the church or other boards. We all 3 serve on our local irrigation board. Like Stephen said, he's a legislator. I also serve on the Conservation Board and Farm Bureau Board, along with helping at Bethany Home Board right now too. We all have active roles in our church boards. Ron also was awarded just a couple years ago about his natural conservation work that he did by Farm Bureau, so it's only fitting that he talks about that. And one thing I think is so interesting is all 3 of us live within a mile of each other. We are lifelong members of this church. We were all confirmed here. We've continued to grow and be a part of this our whole life. And you know, we all talked the other day, how more can you, when you farm for a living, I don't know how you can't do it without having strong faith. When we look at what God's creations every day, when we're out planting or baling or feeding cattle or working on the rangelands, I mean, it's obvious that we have a passion for what God has given us, and we want to do the best with it. So that's why we're here today to talk to you.
Connie has identified a hymn in our hymnal, hymn 734, and we'll use that to kind of start out with, as she's going to read it as a prayer, and then we'll sing it as well. So.
And I want to thank my aunt for giving me this, because she's done choral directing in the churches for years. But this is a perfect prayer to start us out with our meeting. God, whose farm is all creation, take the gratitude we give. Take the finest of our harvest, crops we grow that we may live. Take our plowing, seeding, reaping, hopes and fears of sun and rain, all our thinking, planning, and waiting, ripened in this fruit and grain. All our labor, all our watching, all our calendar of care, in these crops of your creation, take, O God, that they are our prayer.
God, whose farm is all creation, take the gratitude we give. Take the finest of our harvest, crops we grow, that we may live. Take our plowing, seeding, reaping, hopes and fears of sun and rain, all our thinking, planning, waiting, ripened in this fruit and grain. All our labor, all our watching, all our calendar of care, in these crops of your creation, take, O God, they are our prayer. Connie's identified a couple more professionally made kind of videos that tells a little bit about agriculture and sustainability. So we're going to take a pause now, and hopefully you can watch those videos, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more.
If you're not a farmer and we start talking about dirt, that may sound a little strange to you. But the dirt on our farms is life-giving material, and it takes very careful care for it to keep it productive. And that's what our farmers do each and every year. Well, sustainability is everything to a farmer, because we want our farms to live on for other generations. We try our best not to plow and turn the land over. Of course, sometimes it's a necessity. Over the last 5 years, our farmers have increased their conservation practices across the country to the tune of 34 million acres they've increased that. And so they're working really hard to make sure they protect the soil and water that has been entrusted to them during their lifetime. Sustainability is a buzzword today. But truth be known, farmers and ranchers have been working on sustainability from the beginning. People in America would be unbelievably surprised if they knew that farmers and ranchers were blazing a trail when it comes to renewable energies. 130,000 farms now employ renewable energy projects. That has to do with windmills, it has to do with solar panels and methane digesters. All the things that are good for our environment. We are making investments in our land and our farms at the same time that we're keeping everybody's pantry full of food. Our farmers and ranchers across this country not only provide food and fiber for our people of our country and the rest of the world, they also lead the way in conservation practices. We not only conserve our soils and water, we also provide unbelievable habitat for wildlife around our farms and ranches. When we talk about the job that our farmers do in conservation practices and what they do for the wildlife, they have voluntarily committed 140 million acres across America to just do that. And if you think about how big that is, it's kind of hard to get your mind around, but if you put California and New York State together, that's the equivalent of what our farmers have voluntarily dedicated to conserving and providing wildlife habitat. It's important to us to keep that up, to make sure that we can pass our farms on to the next generation in better shape than we found it.
I'm a farmer.
I'm a rancher.
I'm a parent, a spouse,
Community leader.
Friend.
and consumer.
My passion is to grow food and fiber that's safe.
Healthy, wholesome, and affordable for your family.
And for mine. I'm not going to tell you what to eat.
I'll grow what you want to eat.
But we don't think your food should be a political statement.
It shouldn't be about furthering an agenda
Or spreading fear and misinformation.
It's too important for that.
When someone tries to scare you with stories about your food, it's time to ask questions.
To separate truth from fiction.
Our family has been growing food for your family for generations.
I care for the environment, the soil, and the water. It's my life.
Today's farming techniques means I use less.
Less water, fewer chemicals, less fuel.
smaller carbon footprints.
Modern agriculture is the essence of sustainability.
What we do on this land means jobs for America.
It means safety, security, and a strong economy.
Growing our own food makes us more secure.
You can have your food however you want it.
Organic or conventional.
From a farmer's market to a modern-day grocery store.
All equally healthy and just as safe.
Now that's freedom.
To keep modern agriculture sustainable, I have to make a living.
But when food gets political, it gets hard.
Profit means plenty of food for everyone.
If I can't feed my family, I can't feed yours.
We have a farm bill, but it's also a food bill.
Our farm bill has tools to protect me from the huge risk in farming.
It protects you too.
It keeps me on the land.
And food in your pantry.
I care about your family.
And what you eat.
I continue to learn, to study new methods, new techniques.
To get better.
We use technology to grow more and to protect the environment.
To grow the best for all of us.
My family lives here on the land.
They eat what we grow.
We wouldn't feed you something we wouldn't feed our kids.
It's my livelihood.
It's my dream.
But it's our food. I farm for my family.
And for yours.
I'm a farmer.
I'm a rancher.
I face adversity just like you.
We have a connection, you and I.
We're connected by our food.
If you want to know more, just ask me.
We're in this together.
We're here to talk more about conservation and creation care and so on and so forth, but it's good to set it in a context. And Connie has identified some interesting statistics about agriculture in the U.S. and the world, and she's going to talk about that for a few minutes now.
Some interesting farm facts that sort of tie into conservation, stewardship, and sustainability. Today, only 2% of farm and ranch families compromise our U.S. population. And of those 2%, right now, each farm family feeds between 166 and 172 people. And the amazing sort of scary statistic is that if our global population continues to grow as expected, we as farmers will have to grow about 70% more food than what we produce now. And what's really interesting is since 2000, we have increased our food that we have produced by 22%. So we've still got a lot more work to do to get up to that point. Roughly right now, 3 million of our people in the United States work in one form or another on a farm. And also of those, 2 million of those are the actual farmers. So, and mostly 98% are family run still to this point. The average age of a farmer right now is 58 years. And also, of farmers today, 1/3 of them are women. So that population is growing also. About 25% of what the United States produces in food, and that value is exported each year. Of that, 10% of Americans today spend money to provide, of their income goes towards food to feed their family. 46% of that is eaten at home, and 54% of that is away from home. Of the average dollar that is spent on food today in the grocery store, only about 14% goes back to the farmer. So if you buy a loaf of bread for $1, which I know it's more these days, but 14% goes back to us for producing wheat. Why we are the only occupation today that does not have control of what the money market value we can get for what we produce. It is market driven, and so that pricing for our population affects how we manage our farms. Another big topic these days is greenhouse gas emissions. The statistics to break down 100% of our gas emissions right now, 10% come from agriculture. 2.8% of that 10% comes from animals and cattle production. 13% comes from commercial and residential, 23% from industry, 25% from electricity, and 29% from transportation. Ethanol production right now does help reduce gas emissions by 47 million per ton. I told you how we've increased our production and how we're going to have to continue to do that. So that is something that we really want to continue to really strive and work towards, because we're going to have to grow 70% more food by the year 2050. Careful stewardship, as we're going to talk about now, by American farmers have spurred a 44% decline in erosion of the cropland by wind and water since 1982. So I think, Pastor, if you want to start asking some questions about conservation, that's a good way to go into that.
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible statistic. 42% in the last 40 years have been reduced. Of course, it's to the farmer's interest to keep the good soil and water around. And that's one reason why these people and most farmers are interested in that. We're going to start out by asking Ron Heimer about some conservation programs. And the first one is, how can you deal with the highly erodible land, the HEL land? How can you help so that the soil doesn't erode from those places?
That's probably basically where initially the first conservation really started, was keeping the soil on sloping ground with utilizing terraces and waterways, which is the terrace follows on a gentle grade around the slope of the hill and drops into a grass waterway that takes water on down the hill, in a grassed area that retains in some of the nutrients that might be carried off with the water, and it slows it down so it does not take soil with it. And that practice is started out, as far as I know, probably started really being implemented back in the 50s, and has been immensely, virtually all highly erodible ground now has some kind of water management systems, terraces and waterways to reduce that erosion. Another thing is grassed areas along the edges of fields and between fields and waterways called buffer strips. It's a grass strip that between cropland and waterways that will contain erosion that comes off of the tilled ground. Anybody else have anything else? There's we utilize windbreaks for homes, yards, livestock facilities. Usually got windbreaks of some sort to give them protection mainly in the winter weather.
So what does that do? It keeps the wind, it prevents the wind from tearing off the topsoil off of the fields, or why do you put a windbreak up?
Oh, there isn't really windbreaks for field. That's more for homesteads and places where livestock are kept to keep livestock comfortable and protects them from winter winds.
And years ago, they may have built some with hedge trees and other things to slow it down from the 20s, but things continue to change as well. So as we work through each of these things, the goal is just keeping the soil and nutrients in place, whether it's from the water or the wind, and Connie gave some of the details that help with that. And that's something we still want to work towards, but in the years past, we would have planted a lot of cedar trees and hedge trees, and now those have actually changed to be invasive species in our grasslands. So managing those continues to change, and we're lucky to have programs at the universities and others that help us look at how to manage that, look at best practices and how we continue to move forward. Cover crops have been talked about. It is another thing. I've started to do some of that. I haven't done a lot. 2 years ago, they worked pretty well. The crop got established pretty well. I could tell that it held everything together. It made the nutrients that were there more available for the crop, and that was useful. This past year, the winter wasn't quite as cooperative, and the cover crop did not have the same impact. But working to implement those programs that just keep all of the soil, the nutrients in place, so that they're where they can be used and not a problem downstream or whatever they could become, is one of the challenges. And one of the other things that we do is just soil testing to know where are we, what is the health of the soil, so that we know what we're working with, and we manage that very closely year to year to see, are we improving, are we holding our own, and what do we need to improve, either the matter that's in the soil, the organic matter, or the nutrients that are needed for the plants. And that's just an important management piece, so that you handle each year. But as we mentioned, we've been on the farms for generations, and we want to make sure that that next generation has an even better soil than what we're working with today.
Connie, could you tell a little bit about what a gully structure is and how that helps? And
soil conservation has, they can put in box gully structures if you have a really highly erodible area where water really travels, like this past week when we had 4.5 inches of rain and you have water drainage from the slope. Gully structures are concrete box structures that help slow the water flow down and don't let it take all the soils with, and keeps it in place. It's really helped in a lot of areas where it's feeds it into a ditch or a creek or a stream or a culvert. Like Ron said about buffer strips, they are such a filtration system. And it's the same with CRP grasses. Everybody's heard of CRP. We have so many programs on that now and a lot of CRP was put in place years ago when a lot of native grasses were broken up to produce crops, and then later down the road realized that native grass was the best place for that soil and that type of ground. And so it was put back in place with a lot of wildlife programs to help. All different kinds of seed mixtures we use on those depending on the program that you're in, whether you want to have a area for prairie chickens, quail, pheasant. It all depends on what location you're in, but CRP has been a real blessing above our dam at Canopolis. It has stopped the erosion and sedimentation into Canopolis Lake phenomenally. It slowed that process down because it filtered the water as it went through and didn't take all the soil in with. So it's a real positive program that's been in place for years.
It may not be that everyone knows what CRP is. Can you tell us what the initials stand for? And
Conservation Reserve Program.
And that's a government, federal or state program?
It is a federal government program, yes.
Okay, and they kind of, how is it they rent the land from you?
They
or something
basically, most CRP programs are put in for, most of them are in for a 10-year period, and then they can be renewed. And,
okay.
And they can always, you can change what type of program you have to, but we've rolled into, I mean, there's CRP, there's several that are in their 30th year of CRP and rolled over again. Some just recently, now that some of our crop prices and our production has improved for drought tolerant programs, a lot of that has went back into production too. It's a program that changes every year.
Okay. Ron, can you tell us a little bit about the water quality in soil and planting and how you can address that with the different agricultural methods?
Okay, well, the conservation practices is part of that. Earlier, the terrace, waterways, grass strips and stuff. Something has come into the picture of agriculture kind of more recently, still have been in place in some fashion for 25 years, but no-till and minimum till, where you don't use a moldboard plow and loosen the dirt way up. You control weeds with some chemicals and cover crops and always keep some root material in your soil, and it helps hold water on the soil and when it does rain, and it's a newer thing that's come into place in agriculture that's quite popular anymore.
And how about soil testing? Why, I see something here about preventing nitrogen runoff. Why would you want to prevent that, and how do you do those kind of things, or how do you test the soil?
That's right. In today's marketplace, nitrogen's worth a lot of money, so you soil test and apply so that way you know what you do have in your soil, residual left in your soil, and then you just apply nutrients as to what the crop you're growing will need. But soil testing will tell you what you got, and then from that you can determine what you need to add.
So nitrogen is something that the plants need to grow, in other words. That's something that's obvious to all of you, but maybe not to everyone. They need the nitrogen, or some plants anyway need the nitrogen to be able to
nitrogen and phosphorus.
Okay.
You need your nutrient. They need nutrients to grow.
Okay. And how about what's about compaction? What are compaction testing and moisture testing, and what does that have to do with conserving the soil?
Well, moisture testing would probably have more to do with adding air, knowing what you got, and adding irrigation water for producing a crop.
Okay.
That's where that would come in.
And compaction testing, that's how tight the soil is? Or?
Yeah, and equipment can do can do that.
Okay. And what, so if it's too compact, you need to break it up again somehow? Is that the idea, or?
You may, whether you're doing that with tillage or through your cover crops with different
Yeah.
types of things that can penetrate.
Okay.
So,
There's cover crop plants that, like radish, there's deep rooted cover crops that'll grow more underground than they do above ground, and it'll opens the soil up.
Okay.
So
Alfalfa is a prime example.
Okay.
That does well.
We always heard earthworms were good for
They
breaking
are.
up soil, but maybe you don't plant too many of those.
but the water quality and no-till and minimum till are something that's changed massively during my lifetime, because I remember
Yeah, really.
plowing all the time in the 70s and into the 80s, and I still have a moldboard plow at the place. There is a place where it can be useful for incorporating organic matter to improve soil health, but
And building terraces back.
yeah, but we have not hooked onto that since 1991. I remember.
I can believe
I
it.
think we
that
can
point in
all,
time.
yeah, we can all vouch
And
for
that's
that.
a major change in terms of handling the soil, and specifically it's been the goal that Ron talked to of having residue on top, whether it is from previous plants that are still there to hold the soil, or the residue from a cover crop that would be a living residue.
Stephen, you want to continue and say a little bit about how crop rotation fits in with the soil and water conservation?
Sure. Well, crop rotation is just a way to plan a number of things, as different crops use different nutrients. So soybeans and alfalfa fix nitrogen in the soil, and wheat and corn use a lot of nitrogen relative to those crops to get the yields that we want. And Connie talked about the increases in yields, and part of that is managing both varieties, but as the variety changes, you can't drive a yield without having the necessary inputs that are there. I can't get a certain 60 bushel wheat without the requirement of nitrogen that will be in 60 bushels of wheat, so per acre. So that is part of the rotation. Part of it is the opportunity to do control for weeds or invasive things that you don't want by moving to wheat, which of course here we'll plant in October and harvest in June typically. That puts a different cycle in terms of managing what would normally be growing during that season or the out season, as we switch to corn and soybeans that we may plant in May and harvest in September to November. So the rotations are for all of those purposes, and an unusual thing here, given that we have the Canopolis Dam and we're able to irrigate out of the river, we do look somewhat at what the water supply may be and how that works, particularly for me with off-season permits in the irrigation system.
I'm going to let Connie talk a little bit more about irrigation. My youngest son has been in her river where with the chainsaw probably cutting out trees and so on, where the input for the pivot is. So
And he's climbed several towers to fix lines too. But
tell us a little bit about irrigation and why you need it, and what kind of effect that has on the conservation and so on.
all three of us are blessed to be able to irrigate. We all irrigate out of the Smoky Hill River. We all are permitted to do that, and it is a controlled amount that you are able to use each year. We are able to use the natural flows that come out of the Canopolis Rake that travel down the Smoky Hill River. And depending on what crop we grow and what rotation we're in, that has a bearing on what we use as far as the water usage. We all too also have well irrigations, and they're in the same situation where we're allotted how much acre feet we can use out of that well system. The state of Kansas, the water office, controls all of that as far as how many permits, how much is in the area, and they are very on top of not allowing too many permits to only be able to use what water is in our area. We're blessed to have a valley of water that comes through, and it is tied. We are on the edge of the Ogallala Aquifer, but we also are blessed that in our area, our river stream is a gaining stream as it travels down. So we regenerate, and so we're very lucky to have that and be able to grow crops in this area.
And I don't think any of us are on the Ogallala. That would be a little ways
just
to
a little
the
bit out, but
west
we're right on
of
the edge
us.
of
The
it.
water that we draw is literally from the river, or what's referred to as the alluvial aquifer from the river. So it is fed. If there's flow in the river, we have water in the river in the wells. There's not water in the river, there's not water anywhere.
Yeah, the river recharges groundwater.
Right, and as Connie had mentioned, we are appropriately regulated on the total volume we can pump as well as the rate that we can pump, so that everything works together on the needs that there are. Water is an issue that we've worked on a lot in Kansas, and what I've discovered is it is very local. It is very different here than it is in the Ogallala or other areas. We pretty well can see physically if we're going to have water because we can watch the river, and we all watch it very closely during the summer, whether it's going up or down. But in working with that, 2012 was our 1 year that it was really touch and go for whether or not we could irrigate, and we were so fortunate that all of the players really worked together. The city of Salina was a key partner with us. They are one of the larger users of water from the river for the municipal needs, but we figured out a system where we voluntarily said, okay, we only have X amount of water running down the river. There has to be at least a minimum amount of stream flow for wildlife, which I think is at 20 CFS at the gauge just past the Salina intake. And Salina worked with all of us to say, okay, you can turn on for this period of time. Now you've got to be off and you're on. Do we still have enough water at Salina? And managing that resource was a big exercise in that year. And that's the water board that we now have to work together to plan for that if that should happen again.
So the water board tells you how much water you can take out of the river, and then you have to measure how much you're taking out of the river.
Well, the state tells us how much we can, and we have to measure again. We measure our rate, however many gallons per minute, and our total quantity that we're allotted for the year in each permit. And that is how they are able to manage that resource to make sure that everyone that has a permit has adequate water to meet that need.
Okay, maybe to kind of conclude this section, if Connie wants to tell a little bit about, she mentioned it, or some people have mentioned it before, but about the grasslands and well, maybe you've talked about that. Can you hay the CRP? Can you harvest hay from the CRP?
Some of the CRP programs allow you to hay part of it, a portion each year. On drought years, which actually we've already kicked into that because we are in a drought year right now, then they will allow you to hay some of it or graze some of it on years that we are extremely dry. You have to leave a minimal amount of grass back, but it is a nice program that keeps us going, and especially cow-calf or beef stockers, producers are able to keep their animals and feed them.
So normally you cannot graze animals
CRP,
there, but
no.
not CRP. Okay, and then a little bit more about native grass. You have something here about invasive species and then prescribed burning. That may be something some of the listeners here don't know about. Why do you burn the grass?
Well, I think all of us living here in Kansas have been blessed to drive the drive to Kansas City and drive through the Flint Hills. And actually, maybe some people don't know, but that natural Flint Hills is probably the top rated. It's either the top one or the second rated native grassland in the world, not just in the United States, but in the world. It's if anybody gets a chance to listen to them, how they study about how that limestone allows that grass and that water, it's an amazing production system that ecosystem does in the Flint Hills. But one of the ways that they get better production out of that is by prescribed burning. And if you have noticed, and I don't have a picture to show us, but we are in a very serious area of protecting our native grasslands right now. If you go through our whole, from Nebraska to the Sand Hills, all the way down to Texas to their grasslands, we are getting invaded tremendously by red cedars and other invasive tree species. And each year it just continues to grow and take more of that good native grass. Prescribed burning is one way to reduce that, to kill those seeds. Otherwise, it is a manual labor to go in and remove those trees, chemicals to kill those. If you hear about how our hedge trees, our hedge balls, how the seeds can get transferred up to a mile by birds carrying them, the same with red cedars. It's just becoming really serious situation, and if we don't all work together to keep these native grasses growing, it's something to be very concerned about. And everybody, we've had meetings, and the studies, the extensions, the land grant schools are all studying this and informing us and keeping us on top of working on that.
Thank you. I think I'm gonna pause right now, and then we'll come back for just a couple more questions. So just to kind of conclude this time, I thought it could be interesting to hear how you're thinking that agriculture and your farming practices fit in with our God-given duty or task to take care of creation. So yeah, whoever would like to answer that question, you're welcome.
Well, we can all chime in on that, but the call and the opportunity is large, and as has been mentioned before in the process, we're all in this together. And how do we take care of creation together, enjoy and be sustained by it? So the job that we have in particular is twofold, which is how do we continue to meet the world demand for food, and how do we continue to care for creation? And those go hand in hand, because without continuing to build the creation care, there's not a way to continue to build the amount of food that we grow. As Connie had shared, we increased by about 20% our production over the previous 20 years, and the projection is that we have to increase by 70% over the next 30. That is particularly daunting just to look at, and again, exactly how will population grow? What will that demand be? While it's not certain, it's a call to action to look at how do all of these elements come together in a sustainable way to make sure that we meet the demand, that people don't go hungry, and that the earth is cared for. And as we look to each of our fields to leave them in a better place, and as we look collectively how we leave our atmosphere and our world that way. A number of the individual things that we talked about lean that direction as we look at the changes that we've seen in our time frame, from tillage to water use. We talked about irrigation, but most of us grew up with flood irrigation and started with that. And I don't know if any of us do flood irrigation anymore, but it uses a lot less water in the systems that we do use to be able to, again, maximize the value of each of those inputs. I'm not sure we found the trouble-free way to irrigate yet. That's always fraught with those issues. But it is figuring that out together that I think is our call.
Farming is hard work, but it's our life's calling, and I don't think any of us want to do anything besides that. It's our passion and our faith, and we appreciate the opportunity of what we do. I think we look back at our great-grandfather, grandfathers, our parents, our dad, our mother that spent their life providing this and passing it on to us, and our most important thing is to be able to sustain it and pass it on to the next generation too. It's a blessing to do it, and we enjoy it. It's hard and it's challenging, but we all ask for your help too. But we want to sustain it for the next generation.
Yeah, it's pretty well said. Our day-to-day life is working with creation. What's Mother Nature in the hand? I mean, when you put a seed in the ground, you really don't know what you're going to get. The weather factors, what you're going to get at into the growing season. And it's a challenge, and it's fun, rewarding, disappointing. It can be all over, but it's a wonderful experience to work with creation.
Well, thank you very much, Ron Heimer and Connie Dorff and Stephen Johnson. As I indicated, we are filming this on Memorial Day, but you'll come back here or another place together and be ready for some more discussion and answer some questions during the workshop during the Synod Assembly. But we thank you for this time now, and pray that God will bless the work of your hands, because it's important so that the world will have something to eat. Thank you.
And we are very fortunate that Stephen and Ron and Connie are now joining us live from Assyria. So glad that you're here. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I told them I learned so much. I'm not a farmer, and it just amazes me at the continual learning and growing and changing and pivoting. And I don't think I'd be a very good farmer, because what do you do when it doesn't rain? So thank you, first of all, for your presentation, but thank you for feeding us. We are so grateful. We want to open it up if you all have questions. And what I'll do is, as you raise your hands, I'll call on you. If you'd like to address it to a certain person or just to the panel, and that they can respond. So just have at it. Yes.
Will they be able to hear me?
Can you hear her as she speaks? Well, go ahead and try it. I can always.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, I believe it was Connie mentioned about the red cedar trees. That
Yes.
Overtaking the grasslands, and I think a lot of that is because of non-farmers tripling that land for hunting. So do you see that is a major problem, and is there anything we can do about that?
Did you hear the question? Okay, about red cedars, the problem of red cedars, and that part of that is pride buying by people who then plant those for, no.
They just let them grow.
They let them grow. They don't get rid of them.
Because they're hunters.
See, you can tell I know nothing about this. So is that, how can we help address that so that it doesn't impinge upon what you are trying to do in your farming? So what are, I guess the question too is, how do we partner with you to help in some of those things with invasive species and other problems that are created in ways that you don't have control over?
Well, for one thing, the red cedars, when they were first brought over, they were used so much for windbreaks, and they did do a tremendous purpose. I mean, I have a cedar windbreak in front of our farm to break the north wind. But the one thing that we didn't realize when these breaks, and when you let, which I even learned at one of our rangeland meetings this last winter, is that basically a little red cedar tree doesn't start producing seeds till it's about 6 or 7 years old. But the volume of water that a red cedar requires is absolutely astronomical. People don't realize that a cedar that's 8 to 10 foot tall, do you know that it averages about 25 to 35 gallons of water a day that cedar takes out of the grasslands to keep it alive, and then that starves that from our native grasses. So what we need to do now is work on that encroachment. Is every year it is moving further and further into the Flint Hills, the Sand Hills in Nebraska. Oklahoma and Texas are in terrible shape right now. And it's hard work, but prescribed burning is one of the best avenues to get rid of those, because it burns the whole cedar. They're easy to get rid of. And even you guys, like even driving to Kansas City, as you notice, a lot of your suburban areas are full of cedar trees that have been cleared for development. That's really sort of a blessing in disguise, because those cedars are just, birds can spread those a couple miles so easily. They pick up those little seeds and carry them and drop them. And I spent the whole morning cutting little cedars out of a section of grass, and and spraying little hedge trees that birds have spread. And it's just a constant battle. But just, I guess, to be aware of that there are other tree species that would be better to plant for whether you want it for ornamental value or windbreaks. You know, I'd look at other species because these have become very, very invasive. I hope I answered what you asked.
And if it's related to the hunting grounds, there's probably enough cedars that we have in a variety of places, whether they're along the riverbanks or in our windbreaks. I don't know that one source is overwhelming in being able to provide those seeds that continue to populate. But I mean, one tree can provide a lot of seeds, and I can be guilty of having one of those in my pasture that I need to go out and get as well. But I think what Connie said, the awareness of that and how we can all work together in that over time and find a tree that at least doesn't present that problem to use more going forward.
Trees are male and female, just like, you know, they have their species too. So if you see a seed bearing one, those are the ones we need to remove first off. The same with your hedge ball trees, you know, those need to be removed. Not, you know, there's male and female on those, so some don't produce too. So the same scenario, if you're going to start where you want to leave some cover, get rid of the seed bearing ones, and that makes a world of difference.
Yes. Along the same lines, I know Bradford pear trees are very invasive, and I'm seeing those spreading out of the suburban areas and into the Flint Hills, cropping up along the highways and everywhere else. Why is it that, like, for example, within Kansas, we can't simply outlaw the additional planting, people adding Bradford pears and red cedars and things that are highly invasive? Has the legislature ever tried to outlaw those?
So I haven't heard a discussion of outlawing some of the tree species, but it's absolutely something that we could deal with in the Natural Resources and Ag Committee to discuss what of those things we would want to. So that could be a useful idea for us to take back and then work to get those agreements on, okay, where do we start and what has the biggest impact? And and the pear tree may have more of an impact in one area of the state than another as well, that we want to look at it and get a handle on where those issues may most present themselves. So those are a good idea, and I'd be happy to help write a bill that could be introduced and start that discussion.
And yeah, you're right. The Bradford pear is one that's very much on the radar list. The same with musk thistles. I don't know if you guys in the Kansas City area realize that pretty little pink flower that's in a lot of the ditches and areas spreads about 10,000 to 15,000 seeds per seed head. And you battle that for years after one of those becomes mature. And the same with Johnson grass. That has become a real issue in our roadways and ditches. And that's where it takes a little bit of work. I don't know if it's legislature, but those things, the extension or land grant colleges, they're always studying that and presenting that to come to that point where now this is a noxious species. We need to put that on the list, and then we'll get help in that area. So it's a great point. Thank you.
And the musk thistle is a noxious weed,
yes.
So it is on a list.
And so is Johnson grass.
Would be one that we could perhaps follow.
Yes.
Yes, I can first and then you answer.
I'm Dave Peterson, and I grew up in western Kansas near Oakland, and my brother still farms out there. He's involved in the ag business, and one of the things he's noticed over the years is that he used to plant wheat around the 1st of September. Now, because of changes in the climate, it's 2 weeks later. If he plants it too early, it's infected by insects or it's too dry. So he now, because, and it's just because of climate change, that's caused him to change these seasons happen. My question would be that some of these invasive species of trees or grasses, would they be caused by climate change? Would that allow them to be an invasive species into the Flint Hills? If climate change had not occurred, would it stay in more of a natural type of climate that was there before climate change?
So I don't know. Do you have a? I don't know that we know all of the answers, because there is change that we observe on the invasive species. Whether those would change, I can't say that I have observed that. What I see is, as there are more red cedars, it is more of a problem. And so as those have come in, that piece is the happenstance there. So perhaps you can give a little more guidance there, or Ron or Connie may have an answer. On the timing of planting and harvest, I've seen variance in that, but I can't find an exact trend. I remember oftentimes cutting wheat with my dad on the 4th of July, and now that's unusual. I remember cutting it once on Memorial Day, which was really unusual, but I have seen it shift later and earlier, so I can't get a discernible, okay, I've seen it shift one direction over time. I would say generally it's earlier now than when I was little, and I don't know if that's only the change in climate, if it's the change in varieties. I've also sought some varieties that mature earlier for the opportunities to have a double crop season. So I think I see shifts, but can't identify a permanent trend in, at least here, the planting dates and harvest dates. And I don't know if the invasive species would be responding.
I would think mostly not. There's just more of them around, and that's why there's more seed and spread more.
I know at our state conservation meetings, it's been several years ago, but the National Weather Service gave a really interesting presentation. And, you know, they said several things. They said weather and our climates and everything is cyclical. I mean, you know, I can remember as kids, we all had snowmobiles. I mean, there were years that I cross-country skied to check cattle and calving in the winter, and we had to use a snowmobile to get to the trench to get to the tractor to feed the cattle, you know, and we don't see that now, but yet when you asked them that, they said, just be patient, it will come back. You know, you're going to see those big snows again, or, you know, and now we seem to see, you know, well, I was telling the guys while we were waiting, I just added up, we had 10.5 inches of rain this month of May. And so far in June, we've had 4.5 inches just in this first week. And so we're at 15 inches. Well, that's half of our yearly total that we get. But, you know, we'd like to see that spread out a little bit, but we don't have control of that. But, you know, it could be some things affecting that. But I don't know if we have the answers to that. There's always studying it.
I think that's the key. So we can see what we've observed, but I don't know we have the answer. And we just hope your brother got some of that rain out in Oakley.
It's dry out there.
It's dry. And my question is, ELCA now has a big emphasis on advocacy. And a lot of us have been trained in how to be advocates, not only for people living in poverty, but for creation, and the list goes on and on. And all of it usually depends on what the gaps are. Like, where's a gap? What do we need? How can we advocate for something to make a better world, God's creation? So my question to you is there something that ELCA and our advocacy local groups could do to help farmers as you're creating this creation?
That's a great question. I mean, you know, like we said, we're all in this together, and that's what you're asking. What can you do in the urban areas to help the rural areas? And, you know, you know, buying local is a huge trend right now. I just, you know, buying the 3 years of COVID that we've been dealing with really spurred on buying locally and getting food produced right within the area. And I think that's really great, and that's really interesting, and it really spurred a lot of people on to do that. You know, we've got to, like that stat that I gave, you know, and Stephen was talking about, we've got to increase our food production by 30% and to be able to keep feeding our population. And you know, that's going to be a huge challenge. But, you know, you know, Ann, you do such a great job of feeding the hungry and the homeless in Kansas City, and that's a blessing what you do. I think, you know, those things are wonderful. I've always said that we waste too much food, and that we need to, our country has so much in front of us that we have the availability to produce. We just got to find a better way to help everybody out.
And all in this together, and I think one of our keys is just to always seek balance. Just like in the last question, we can say what we observe, but I don't know that we have the truth. But as we all bring our experiences together, we can seek that together. And I think if through our advocacy, we continue to model that of how do we seek answers together with everyone at the table, I think that brings a lot to the table for not only the issues we face on climate and food safety and food adequacy. I think it could be a great way to model our approach to a number of issues. And I think the church is so well positioned to help lead us to do that and always have a focus on what kingdom we serve.
I think you have a team of a couple people here at least. So if you write some legislation about the trees, as Pastor Alex suggested, you have some advocates here that can at least come to Topeka or whatever might be helpful. And so I hope that you would keep us in the loop too, what we can do. I like to think of myself as a farm girl, but you know I really am not. But you know, I think that's where my heart is. And so I think that a lot of us would like to help, we just don't know how.
Well, depending on the outcome of the next election, I may either have a lot of time to help. Be great.
Or from the state treasurer's office, you're going to be.
Yeah, shout out for Stephen putting his name in to run for state treasurer and help the whole state of Kansas out. So we definitely want to try to help him in that avenue and appreciate that. You know what Ron said at the end of our program is we put a seed in the ground and we are at the goodwill and mercy of our creator on, we don't know what's going to happen, you know, whether that seed is going to produce or, you know, whether we get rain or moisture, you know, it is a challenging job, but what a blessing it is to watch and see what happens. So, you know, what we can do together is so important.
Here, oh, and then you.
How far east does the Oklahoma aquifer go?
Yeah, I think it's on the other side of Great Bend from us, and I'm not sure where the farthest east reaches, but I'd say generally it's probably another 50 miles west of where we are. Is it farther than that? So, and we're pretty much in the center of the state here in this area.
It pretty much covers the western third. Yeah, yeah. And you know, those farmers in that area, you know, like I said, we're blessed to be in central Kansas because we have replenishing and we've had geological studies and our water replenishes itself and we're really fortunate, but they're working so hard out there to try to do their best they can and cut down and get that water built back up and you know, it's going to take time. And you know, I think education is so important these days. You know, we try to educate our younger kids and go to grade schools, but if we can just let them know how important it is to preserve water, that is our most important commodity. You know, I think a lot of, and I shouldn't get on my soapbox, but you know, as far as keeping the water running, brushing your teeth and taking a half an hour shower instead of a 5-minute shower, you know, things like that. maybe not watering your lawn quite as much. I mean, it's all those things of all of us together. The same with us. We don't run our irrigation unless it's needed. I mean, we check our moisture levels and we do the best we can with what's allotted to us. So, we try to produce more food that way for us. So those are all important aspects to consider.
And we're in an area where we can see if the river is flowing. We get to see our water supply, and it's a lot more transparent.
So I end with that. I've heard that the Ogallala aquifer was really low. And is it still that low, and what can be done to help recover from that besides, is there anything besides taking shorter showers and things like that to help the aquifer recover?
So there are a number of pieces, and I think the answer on that one is it kind of depends by area. So in the area, say, Wichita County, and some of those that were covered by the Ogallala, it has gotten very low, and irrigation has ceased on many of the parcels of ground that had formerly had irrigation. As you go further south into Stevens and Morton County, where it was deeper, it is low, but there's still several feet of water that exist in those places. And it doesn't seem, I originally thought that it was kind of an underground lake that was pretty mobile, but it does appear that water is more, I don't know if regional is the right word, but the transferability across miles is apparently pretty low. So there are a couple of areas when we first looked at water in the early 2010s, we were really concerned about that level, and by some manner, 2012 was about a low point. There actually was a little bit of recharge in several areas of the Ogallala that we weren't able to fully explain how that had happened. But for the most part, it has maintained those levels that we've watched over roughly the last 10 years. And it's generally been local management to say, okay, how is this group going to protect their community and plan for today's economy and their next generation and what that looks like? Some are doing better than others.
Other questions? Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah.
How much do you think ethanol plants are affecting the Ogallala?
Did you hear that? How much do you think the ethanol plants are affecting the Ogallala aquifer?
I'm not positive. I'm trying to think of the placement of the ethanol plants, and much of the corn that is grown over the Ogallala is used for feeding in the feed yards. There absolutely are the ethanol plants as well. And that is still used as, after the ethanol is extracted, the wet distiller's grain is still used as a foodstuff. So I don't know how much it affects the Ogallala and other areas, given the multiple uses for that grain. So I'm not sure I have a great answer. I'm thinking it may still be grown whether or not the ethanol plant was there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of large dairies out in western Kansas now too, and they're, they watch their water consumption too. It's western Kansas is a tough area as far as the last couple of years. They had great moisture and grew some tremendous crops, and and then they summer follow a lot, and maybe get one crop every 3 years with water level they get out there. It's you just got to adapt, and I know the state of Kansas, like Stephen says, they watch those areas close and try to monitor those so that we are doing the right thing, and I know, fuel's a touchy subject right now, but ethanol does take water use, and, hopefully they monitor that and it's in good locations. But, I don't know what else to say on that, but it's a concern.
Now, one more question. can you estimate how much corn? I assume you raise most of corn.
Wheat,
Soybeans,
soybeans.
soybeans and corn.
Wheat.
You grow much wheat?
What are your main crops that you guys?
Yeah.
It's a pretty diverse mix between, there's some corn, not a tremendous lot of corn in this area, soybeans and wheat, and grain sorghum, milo.
And a lot,
Kind of lean toward crops that don't require a lot of water, because sometimes it don't rain also. Or
and like Ron said earlier, our crop rotations, we try to do a rotation of, you know, wheat, milo, or corn, and then go to soybeans and get that rotation so you have cover crops and something growing all the time, and alfalfa. There's a lot of alfalfa in our area too. Cattle producers, a lot of cattle producers plant a lot of cane for silage. So, you know, we're pretty diverse in this area.
And I'm about split equally between acres for wheat and soybeans, and then corn and sorghum are kind of substitutes based on the price that's being offered and what I can lock in, and how much water is behind the Kannapolis Dam, and whether I think I can fully irrigate a season of corn. And that's probably about maybe a fourth to a third of the number of acres that I have in either beans or wheat. And that is higher for me than before I had the irrigation out of the river that I was doing consistently with the pivots. Prior to that time, wheat would have been the primary crop by a decent margin. Probably would have consistently been 60 to 70% of my acres in wheat, with a smaller rotation to the other crops.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I asked that, probably in western Kansas now, even on dry land, probably mostly corn. Although luckily this year, in some ways, for at least the U.S. farmers, they did plant wheat. But of course, my question would be, how much in corn, how much would be used for ethanol, how much would be used for growing, feeding beef, and then how much would actually be used for food. Whether that would be, at least I think those would be the three categories that you would be able to, that corn would be used for.
Right, and those would be the keys. I don't know the stat for that overall. The bit that I grow is generally used for feed from around here, not quite in an area where I get to the ethanol plants, and most likely going into just feed.
I think in our area, a lot of us look at inputs and costs, and that sort of drives what you're going to plant. You know, right now, you know, you're seeing the markets are pretty high right now, but I think you could all get an honest answer out of us that our inputs are so high right now with fuel and fertilizer prices that it just washes it out. It sort of is keeping it at about the same level. But, you know, when we market our grains, we honestly don't know. I mean, I know they have those stats and we should have looked that up ahead of time, but you know, most of us haul it off and have a contract to market it. So we don't know quite what production of that goes on to the ethanol plants and what goes to the feed yards. But I would say the majority in our area goes to feed for cattle source on corn. Beans is such a tremendous crop. What you can do with soybeans, you know, with the use of the oils and all the products. I mean, you know, we have our soybean association come talk to our 3rd and 4th graders, and when they start showing them all the products that has soybeans in it, I mean, they can line up 150 products in front of you, toothpaste, you know, things that you would never dream of that, you know, has soybean in it. So it's like I said, if we could just become a little more educated, all of us included, that would help us a lot to help promote what we do in agriculture.
Well, I think we're drawing close on time, but Ron and Stephen and Connie, we are so grateful. Not only that you put that wonderful film together for us, but that you spent time answering our questions. It is so incredibly important to have your perspective here, and we are so grateful that you have shared so much time and insight with us. And this need to help each other out, to cherish, we can just see the love of the land in the eyes and hear it in your voices as you speak about the work that you do as farmers. We are grateful for the work you do, for the faith that you show when you do that, and for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.